let's hear what Mike Reiss thinks about that report on Sunday and maybe whatever he's been hearing through the grapevine since or whatever. What do you got?
Well, there's a lot of interesting parts of that report. And I think the main thing to me is it really doesn't change anything that we have discussed relative to Bill Belichick and his future. So I think when you hear the report, and I think, Zoe, I saw you in the tunnel not long after the report came out, I think our first sort of reaction to each other was, whoa, does this mean that they're locked in here, after all we've talked about, that they've committed to him and he's their guy going forward? What I've learned subsequently is this is pretty much standard operating procedure that every offseason there's conversations. What is this going to look like going forward? And maybe it's more of a year-to-year type situation. And so to me, that's the main part of it is when you hear the report, you say, oh, what does it mean? And to me, it doesn't really change anything that we've talked about prior to the report coming
To me,
out.
it means he's back next year.
Not to me, Zoe. Not to me.
That's a bad report by
I don't think it means it's a bad report. I think it just means that every offseason they have conversation. What is the future? What do you envision the future look like? What do we envision the future look like? And you add on a year. And that's sort of, to me, and I'm not saying this is definitely what happened, but I think that's generally, like, this isn't like we just hired a coach 4 years ago. His contract's coming up. Let's lock him up for another 5. I think at this point in Bill's career, it's more, hey, every year we'll go year to year here and add on a year to just create we're talking like a smaller window,
So
not
you
like
think
5-6 years.
This is with a year to go, presumably, in this conversation, which would have been this year. Well, I'm not feeling close to being done. Okay, well, we're not going to have you go into that final year. We're going to make an adjustment. We're going to put 2 years together for the next 2. We'll talk again after this season. But it is formalized.
But that brings him back next year contractually.
Contractually, it brings it back. But did we not think he was under contract last year or next year? That's my point.
Nobody knows.
No one knows. That's true. But I would have been surprised if he wasn't, Zoe, if he wasn't.
But the man works for the NFL Network, and he's a reporter for the NFL Network. Ian Rapp, that's who pays his bills.
Yeah.
And for him to go in there and say it's several years that they've come to agreement, that tells me he's back next year. I don't know how the other way that you would possibly look at it. Now, after that, after 24, I think you can.
Because it's not a long-term commitment. Because you can get out of a deal pretty easily with only a year to go on a contract. And it's not a 5-year deal like Mike was saying.
I feel strongly about that part.
Yeah, it's not this.
I know that.
Right. It's not this big, long-term, locked-in extension. It's maybe another year was added on. And that makes it a new deal over the course of a couple of years.
And the way it was presented in the report made it.
Can we just say this, though? Yeah. It is a deal. It is papered. It is signed. Yeah. This is not some handshake agreement or willy-nilly thing where they just, hey, we'll handshake on this and talk about it again after the year, right?
I feel like that's accurate.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, but there is also the notion, Zoe, you're right in that this was, Ian Rappaport, who is – not a flunky. He is an NFL Network guy, whatever that means. But has anyone else come forward and say, yep, I'm hearing the same thing? Normally in something like this, like a pretty sizable report like this, you would get confirmation from other people. Instead, I'm hearing from whether Tommy Curran or Mike Reiss saying, nah, it feels more like more of the same, where it's just year to year, and we'll meet up after the season. We'll see how things are looking. Like, I haven't heard anyone else come out and say, yep, I've heard the exact same thing. At least 2 more years, lock it in. Or even something even more concrete, like we've heard from other owners or GMs in the past talking about the head coach. Happened with Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas. And they came out and said when things were looking really bad in his first year, Josh ain't going anywhere this year. You can bank on that. That is guaranteed. There's nothing like that. There's no one from the team saying this. It's one guy with one report that is ambiguous. So to have questions about it or maybe put your own feelings into it, I'd say that's totally fair game, because this is far from a concrete actual statement from anything other than one guy saying, I'm hearing lucrative new contract, but I'm bum. Could mean a lot of things.
it's sort of open, right? So we know it's going to be lucrative, whatever he signs, and
unnecessary to include that in the report.
Several years or multiple years. I mean, two years covers him there, right? I mean, so I think ambiguous is maybe a good word in terms of it leads you. It doesn't tell you enough, right, to make a definitive conclusion. And as I will just say, like as a reporter, sometimes that's actually something that we talk about is like, as I report this, am I actually furthering the conversation or furthering the situation, or am I making it more confusing and adding more questions to it? And look, I'm far from perfect. I made mistakes. I remember doing something similar with Malcolm Butler that I still regret to this day. To me, this leads to what we're talking about right now. It feeds us and discussions like this, but it really doesn't tell us anything more.
It feels like we've had several reports now, and the picture is still very unclear.
That's the way I feel.
If anything, as I was saying yesterday, I feel like his term and his contract is shorter than I would have assumed it was a week ago. I would have assumed, and we did talk about this, about the possibility that Bill Belichick had been extended for a lot of years at some point and maybe had 3 years to go on his deal. I would have assumed that would have been the case, as opposed to him only having a year to go and having it be a situation where there was constant check-ins and adjustments being made to the contract. I would have assumed he was locked up for years to come. So it actually has changed my mind into thinking, wow, he's got less term left on this thing than I thought he would have had.
Yeah, it doesn't totally surprise me, Beetle, in the sense of, I think part of what makes the Crafts great business people is they know leverage, and I think part of what makes Bill Belichick excellent at what he does is he knows good leverage. And I think when you go more in the short term, year to year, it never really shifts the leverage one way or the other. Do
you think the year to year aspect of it is something the team does not like or appreciate?
No, I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Because for long-term planning, that's not the easiest way to go about doing things.
That is true, but I think it's long-term enough, right? And they've built in things around it, Gerard Mayo, Bill O'Brien, that I think provides enough of a shell there, for lack of a better term. I think they're okay with that, Beetle. I would add one other thing. Did you guys know there was a Robert Kraft interview on Bloomberg News? You're familiar with all that. I haven't listened. Okay.
But tell our listeners, because I know you think this was important.
It was filmed in August, and it was just more. The only reason I think it's important is it's actually one of the only people that know on the record for all of us to see. And he was asked on this David Rubenstein podcast, can Bill Belichick stay forever? Is he going to be back? And I think the answer in the podcast, if I have it off the top of my head, was, I'll let you ask him. He has to decide what's right for him. And I think that all ties into the discussion of the year to year and how they go project to the future.
So what do you think he meant by that when he said it? That
we haven't had the discussion yet on what 2024, 2025 looks like. We're going to have it, and I'll be able to answer the question better once we have that discussion. That would be what I would guess.
And does that lead you to believe that Robert will not at any point hold Bill accountable or ever consider moving on from him, that it will entirely be left up to Bill how long he wants to do it?
No, I think...
Because when I hear that answer, that's what I think.
I understand.
Oh, you're just leaving it up to Bill?
I understand. I think I put it in two different buckets. I think you have to do the extension to show a commitment to him so he knows you're in, but you can still hold him accountable. If the results aren't good, you just eat that extension. It's not... I don't think it's anything that's would prohibit them from moving on if they felt like that was the right thing to do.
So this really doesn't change much for his future.
Not for me.
Mind.
It doesn't for me. Others might feel differently.
I want to get to the other part of this, Mike, and that is, why now? Why did this happen this week ahead of that game on Sunday?
So this gets back to my point. When you report something, it leads to all these other questions, right? And so I can't speculate. I mean, I know.
Oh, you can. Sure you can.
I know. I don't want to speculate, I should say. I mean, one theory is that Bill feels. One theory is that Bill feels the heat and felt like he wanted it out there.
So you really feel this is from football side, not from ownership side? Yes, no, Mike.
I mean,
you make the case
I would
for
say
either?
the odds are higher. It would be from Bill.
I don't understand
if you
how
were
it
putting up,
benefits-
if you're putting up a pie, pie chart.
Have you built the pie chart in your mind yet on this?
No, not
team was
really.
technically 1-5 prior to this report coming out.
Right.
I don't see how it benefits ownership when your team's getting crushed to put out a report that, hey, we're moving forward with this guy. Extended.
And there's really only two parties that this could have come from.
Yeah, because
As
it's
you
a small
mentioned,
circle.
There's only two people here.
I
You know
tried to
what?
come up with a couple of theories as to why ownership might put it out there, which I don't believe, but
Right.
Beatles shot them both down.